All right. Today, Twitter's in the news, but it may be someone other than Dorsey pulling the strings.
Then Facebook says it won't edit Donald Trump's posts any longer. A call that may be, sorry, that's just, I didn't mean that. I meant, then Facebook says it won't edit Donald Trump's posts, a call that may be the breaking point for some of its employees.
And Microsoft, are they out of the news business with robots now in charge?
I'm Stephen Rosenbaum, and this is Future Forward.
I'm Alexis Cordato. Let's launch.
Hey, hey. Greetings and salutations. We struggled with today's show because there's so much news that it would be easy to just get sucked into the TikTok of what's happening all across the country. And we made a decision that I feel pretty good about, which is to do something pretty granular and take a step back and really dig into some of the underlying players and characters around this week that we're in the midst of. So hopefully, lovely listeners, you will enjoy a break from the unraveling CNN-ness of the universe, and dig into a guy named Paul Singer, Paul E. Singer. So first of all, show of hands, how many of you, including Alexa and I, have ever heard that name before, say, 10 seconds ago? I hadn't.
Neither had I.
But it turns out he's central to the world we're currently living in. 75 years old, personal net worth stated to be $3.5 billion. So not an insignificant amount of cash. And let's just start at the beginning, and we'll kind of unravel this. And I've been reading on him all day, so you'll either find some of this I think will turn out to be really interesting. Let's start with what he is. He's thought of as an activist investor. Is that a phrase, Alexa, that you kick around? Do you know what that is?
I mean, they're like people who have high net worth who invest that money into causes that are considered to be in service of the greater good. Like I would consider George Soros to be another example.
So I love you, but you are completely and utterly wrong.
Okay.
Activist investor is a very, remember the movie Wall Street, where Michael Douglas played the greasy-haired greed is good, where he goes in and buys the wire company and essentially buys it for the real estate and fires all the employees.
Yep.
So activist investor. So here, let me give you a list of names of people. This is something that we got from study.com. So here are some names you probably know when you think of activist investors: T. Boone Pickens, Kirk Kerkorian, Carl Icahn, Nelson Peltz, Bill Ackerman, David Einhorn, Dan Loeb. These are kind of like not quite household name activist investors, but they're more, and activist investors are people that historically come into a company and essentially sell it for its parts. They buy just enough shares to become not a majority shareholder, but have a controlling interest, and then they essentially attack the company from within, and they do so for really one agenda, the exact opposite of the one that you suggested, which is why I think it's good that we're doing this. Like it's not about,
right? Yeah.
Well, look, it's not. If you're in the investment world, which neither of us are, it's not a thing you would spend many cycles on. But activist investors, they only care about profit. So, for example, if I came to your apartment building and determined that the real estate in that building was worth more if we tore it down and put up a higher, taller building, the results of what happens to the tenants in that building would be no consequence. And it's not that they don't care; they really don't care. And Michael Douglas is the is kind of the calling card of an activist investor.
Where does the origin come from? Like, I mean, the naming of it is ironic, right? Because it would make you think it's the definition that I gave.
Activist as opposed to passive investor, but you know, there was a different name before it became it was originally Vulture Capital back in that was the and there was a different name. It was private equity would come in and essentially sell a company for its parts, or reorganize the company and put pieces together and streamline it. So here comes this guy. And he run the name you may be familiar with is Elliott Capital Management, EMC, and it's kind of a famous activist investor organization. And to be fair, you know, if you Google them, they're all over. They just bought a chunk of Oracle. They own a bunch of Dropbox. They are funding the lawsuit against Quibi, the patent infringement lawsuit against Quibi. They're very active. They're probably the most active of the activist investors out there. And an activist, so it would be like, you know, so nobody invites them in. Nobody goes, if you're a CEO, there's no part of you that wants to have these guys in your company. They're not there to be your friend. They're there to essentially. So we're going to get to Twitter in a minute because that's really where the story goes. But before that, I just want to kind of walk you through the Paul Singer story because it's very relevant to current events. Lifelong Republican, Jewish, very conservative, funder of Republican candidates, and wasn't really a Donald Trump fan in the early days of, you know, leading up to 2016. In fact, was virulently anti-Trump and was a big supporter of Marco Rubio. But as you start to dig into his history, he's well known. You know, he's. I don't know that I've ever, in my reading, I didn't find anything that said the word libertarian next to his name, but he thinks the government should stay out of finance. He thinks, you know, that wealthy people should not have to kick in more taxes. He's kind of that ilk. You know, the government should stay out of my life. I should just be able to keep my money. Capitalism is good. Kind of old style Republican as we've known them. Small government. And worked actively to keep Trump out of the White House. But, and this is where the thing turns,
dun, dun, dun.
Then Trump wins. And as rich guys are known to do, keep in mind, he's not supporting candidates because of their belief system. He's supporting candidates because of what they will do or not do to him and his investors. So Trump wins. And he immediately is like, all righty then. And he gives $1 million to the inauguration committee. So essentially he's like, okay, Rubio lost. The guy that I was actively fighting won. How can I best express to him my love of his candidacy? Here's a check.
Like an olive branch.
Yeah, $1 million olive branch. And, you know, so you dig into this guy and you try and figure out, does he, you know, so by the way, the other thing that's fascinating about Paul Singer is that he is active and quite public in his fight for equal rights, gay rights, and LGBT rights. Right. So why might that be for a conservative Republican?
Because of some personal connection. I wonder what that could be. Which in this case is his son, right?
It is indeed his son, who he has two sons, one of whom comes out as gay, marries his husband, And Paul Singer, not only is he pro-LGBT rights in the Republican Party, but he's active. I mean, he runs different committees. He raises money. He raises millions and millions and millions of dollars for LGBT. So, I mean, if you were trying to paint a good news picture around Paul Singer, you'd say, good for him. He believes it. But really, it's just self-interest. It's, you know, I didn't really like those gay people, but then I found out my son was gay. And by the way, now I like them, and here's a check. I didn't really like Donald Trump, but then he won, and now I need him to be my friend. So here's a check.
Right. The rules can always change to conform whatever the person needs and wants.
I guess, although, you know, I don't think, I mean, again, you know, all I know about him is, well, to be fair, I know among other things that he's my neighbor.
Like on the Upper West Side?
Yes. So I don't know what to make of that. Hold on. I'm going to click my light back on. Come on. There we go. See if it stays on. Yeah, Upper West Side, neighbor. Which makes me think where a billionaire lives on the Upper West Side. Brief pause. I'm going to open shades. I'm back. So, I want to say that he's an interesting guy, but I'm not sure he is an interesting guy. I think in some ways he's fairly predictable in terms of how he operates and how he places his money.
So, I mean, would you consider him in the class of powerful, wealthy individuals like Epstein, where they put their money in different causes and it was all in service of their own personal gain?
Yeah, I think he's different than Epstein. Well, here, let me read you just a little bit of something from an article I found in something called Market Realist, because I think this will help. The headline says, "Why Elliott Management Might Be in Trouble." Last week, Paul Singer's Elliott Management filed its 13F for the first quarter of 2020. In the last quarter, Elliott Management's AUM was worth $73.15 billion. Its stocks accounted for 23% of its hedge fund's total portfolio of publicly traded securities. Industries and financial stocks were the hedge fund's biggest holdings. So here's why they say trouble. Accumulating XLE call options might have an impact on Elliott's return in the second quarter of 2020. In April, WTI crude oil prices turned negative, and as a result, the entire energy sector stock price collapsed. Also, Elliott's top 5 sells include XLE, as well as S&P Oil and Glass Exploration. And so my point is, if you read all these billions of dollars that he manages for people, are not in Twitter. They're all over the place. And he had a bunch of money in oil stocks that tanked. So, when you wake up in the morning and you're Paul Fisher and you go to the office, you're not thinking night and day about Twitter. You're thinking about Oracle. You're thinking about your investment in Dropbox. You're thinking about all these oil and gas stocks you've never heard of. I mean, and you're trying to be financially crafty about where you put your money and how you continue to earn money in a down economy. I mean, does it not strike you as odd that the U.S. economy is a mess and the U.S. political environment's a mess, but the stock market is still going up?
I mean, I'm not really that surprised about it. I think people have been saying for years the stock market is not a true reflection of the actual economy and the realities of it. It's controlled by such a small percentage of the population. I feel like 20% of the population makes 80% of the trades.
Yeah. I mean, well, so hold on. There's a thing that I want to find. There was a piece of text that explained. Essentially, he's made the bulk of his money by buying into countries that are on the verge of default. Oh, he also owns a big chunk of AT&T, as it turns out. which is interesting. And I've lost a little bit of text, but it explains that all the countries he's bought into when their economy was essentially collapsing. Here, it's on Wikipedia. It's a good. Here we go. The Independent has described him as a pioneer in the business of buying up sovereign bonds on the cheap and then going after countries for unpaid debt. In 1996, Singer began using this strategy, purchasing sovereign debt from nations near default, such as Argentina and Peru, through his NLM Capital Limited, and the Republic of Congo through Kensington International. So, I mean, so you have to put Twitter in perspective. About 6 months ago, 8 months ago, he went in and bought 6% of Twitter and said publicly, "I'm going to oust the CEO." So that, so when he says that, it's not because he's got some political concern about Donald Trump or some political concern about how Twitter behaves in the environment. He just wants to make money. So, and if you look at Twitter's stock price, which I have, it's been flat to going down for the last year. So, So in rolls this quote activist investor and says, "I think we can essentially," and by the way, and his issue, at least publicly his issue, was we need a full-time CEO. Dorsey's a part-time.
Fair.
Yeah, and if you listen to Dorsey, as I have now, I was on their investor call this week for an hour, and I re-listened to his TED talk or his interview that he gave with Chris Anderson at TED a year ago, and Dorsey's answers over the last 12 months have changed very little. He essentially says, "We have a really good management team. They're really talented. They're not going to make much of a mistake. I'm just going to listen and basically sit back." And he goes on these multi-week long, retreats into the wilderness, and he's got, he's hands off is the wrong word. He's I would almost describe. No, I don't. But I don't think that's it. I think he's come to believe that his strategy is going to be, I'm going to let a lot of people fight things out, and then they're going to kind of come up with a conclusion, and I'm either going to agree with it or disagree with it.
And that's one approach. I know some people who believe you hire the best people, you hire people smarter than you, and then you kind of get out of their way.
Although, to be fair, I mean, everyone that I know that's ever worked at Twitter has quit or been fired.
Yeah.
And they were pretty smart. So when he talks about his best people and how smart they are, he never says their name. So it's like they've become these unnamed pseudo leader characters. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I could figure out who they are, but they're not high profile individuals.
So walk me through your thinking with Twitter. So obviously Twitter made a bunch of policy changes. They basically decided to take a stance against tweets that they thought would perpetuate harm, misinformation, incite violence, etc. And they rolled out a feature where you can choose who replies to tweets. Is it everyone? Is it people who you just follow? And so that story hit. We obviously have the news cycle. And then you went down this rabbit hole with Singer. Like, at what point did you start to say, like, wait, why? Like, what is going on here?
So, yeah, let's roll it back so I believed for a couple of weeks, longer actually, but certainly in the last couple of weeks, that imagine that you were in a gunfight. It's you and another person, and you both are walking into a room, guns drawn. You have a pistol, automatic pistol. You have like a, and the person that you're up against has a machine gun. Is there any chance you're going to win that gunfight?
Nope.
Because they're going to go, just going to wave the gun around, and somewhere along the line, they're going to hit you a bunch of times, and you're going to bang, bang, bang. And so Donald Trump has turned Twitter into a machine gun. And the idea that we're going to have an election in 5 months in which Joe Biden is going to respond to machine gun with bang, 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 carefully aimed, thoughtful, well-reasoned. So we're really in this box where either he has to become Donald Trump and write 100 tweets a day that are vicious and mean and inaccurate and threatening, and call women cows and pigs, and claim that people are murderers, just horrible garbage, or hire people to do that for him, or he's going to lose. And I think that Donald Trump is using Twitter, neither how it was designed or how its employees or frankly its management really wants it to be used. But Dorsey keeps coming back to this whole thing about clean, healthy conversations, and they're going to use AI to make conversations more healthy, and all of this hoo-ha. And so when I listened to the investor shareholder call on Wednesday, I was struck by how unbelievably carefully it was written, like down to every question had been anticipated and every answer had been carefully written. And it was, I guess I knew this before, but I found myself realizing he's not in charge. He's not in charge.
Yeah, I think in the context, you have the SEC, you're on an investor call, you have an entire corporate comms team. Like, that format is designed to be as sort of on script as you can be.
Right. Except that a year ago at the TED stage, Chris Anderson, who is notoriously even-tempered and fairly circumspect, said to him, "Jack, you're the captain of the Titanic." And Chris, who I've only heard curse once since I've known him for 15 years, said, "What the fuck are you going to do?" And Jack answered in this roundabout, "Well, we have a really good health and safety team, and we're working on it's a very hard problem we're trying to solve here." And my reaction is, yeah, no, it's really not a hard problem. It's really not. It's a hard problem in that if I said to you, I want you to run the New York Times, but we're going to fire all the staff and you're going to put a computer in to run it, that would be a hard problem. But you're not, because journalists are journalists and editors are editors. They make judgments every day. So Twitter is saying, we're going to solve all these people saying terrible things by trying to come up with some set of rules, which we're then not going to enforce on the President of the United States. And then some algorithm that will, so between Wednesday and Thursday morning, I guess my point about Singer is, when people say, "Jack, you've got to stay," Kara Swisher comes out and does this big thing in the New York Times on Sunday, and that raises a hoo-ha. I don't think Jack has the authority to make that decision.
So you're just saying he's a puppet, and there are people influencing him like Singer behind the scenes.
No, I'm saying something far stronger than that. I think Singer has I think most of the other board members, like if you read the names of all the board members at Twitter, which I've since done, you haven't heard of any of them. None of them are prominent people. They're all people you've never heard of. So this guy comes in, he buys 6% of the company, he says, "I want the CEO out." And then some point between then and the board meeting, he gets a board seat. He puts one of his people on the board. He has a conversation with Jack. And I just, I've had a board of directors. You don't make decisions like this without calling your investors. You just don't make it. President of the United States, traffic, attention, you're the center of a conversation. The traffic's not monetizable. Nobody's saying, "Yay, we love that Donald Trump is publishing lies and garbage on Twitter." Nobody's in favor of it. But the decision to put a warning when he said essentially voting by mail is fraudulent, that was a big decision. That was a big decision.
Yeah.
And so I think the way in which a decision like that gets made at the board level, I think Singer is the new player of all of the investors. He's the activist. He's threatened Dorsey if he doesn't behave properly, or essentially generate. If you look at what Singer has said, is what we want is more audience, more engagement, and more revenue.
All reasonable things for board members to ask for.
Yeah, except that the economy's gone to hell in a handbasket. So Jack wrote a plan for all of these things going up and to the right to answer Singer's question, and then COVID happened. So now you're managing, one of two things happens. Twitter: Donald Trump wins in November, or Donald Trump loses in November. Those are right. It's pretty binary. They've already said they're not taking political advertising. Twitter came out and said that 6 months ago, 5 months ago. So I think the danger is that readers and listeners and viewers say, you know what, this is too ugly for me, I'm out. So you think those changes and the tweaks in the way that came out on Thursday morning are actually, I didn't understand them. Like the way that you can't follow people that don't want to be followed. Like, explain to me why you think that's more than window dressing.
I don't think it's enough, but it's one of those things that helps, I think, prevent aggression and harassment on the platform. So, for example, if I wanted to express grief over George Floyd, rather than have that tweet be responded to by the entire Twitterverse, which might include white supremacists and strangers who I don't care about, actually limiting the engagement to the people in my community who I mutually follow and maybe have met before, whoever I've curated in my timeline, then in some ways that promotes psychological safety as a user. So it's one of many steps that I think Twitter can take to actually promote a more safe and regulated platform.
So, Roger McNamee and Yael Eisenstadt were both on Reliable Sources this morning. Roger's written a terrific Facebook book, and Yael was the head of, among other things, CIA agent, and then at Facebook managing government political advertising for about 6 months before she left. They both have said quite clearly that Facebook and Twitter monetize rage and hatred. So if you accept that as a premise, and we can talk about it, but if you accept that as a premise, then how can you believe that Dorsey actually wants a clean, well-lit, safe environment? I mean,
I think he's doing some soul searching. I mean, it's still early, but it feels like I don't know. They're sort of taking a few steps, but nothing is bold enough to say, "Hey, this is who we are. This is what we stand for. This is what we're going to tolerate." A bold move would actually be banning Donald Trump from the platform.
Right. And what I'm saying here on this podcast with absolute clarity is I don't think it's his call. I think you're presuming that he has a heart and emotional and he's political. He's actually a Democrat, or he's a Republican, or he's an independent, or he's a libertarian. And I'm saying he's none of those things.
You're saying you're saying you don't think he has the power, or are you saying you don't think he cares, or both? Like, has he chosen to sort of be so passive?
I think when he wakes up in the morning, his call sheet has on it, a call from Singer, a call from 2 or 3 other board members, a call from Kara Swisher at the New York Times, a call from Kraft, a call from, General Mills, all of these people, people who have invested millions of dollars, have millions of dollars in shares, are great big media people, or are advertisers. And they're all giving him opinions. And the opinions in some ways are all conflicting. And then he's got a whole bunch of employees that are like lined up and saying, we're unhappy because blah, blah, blah. We're unhappy because we don't want to work.
Hey.
Just keep on going. I'm having Wi-Fi problems.
Okay.
I may connect on my phone while I'm here.
All right.
Stand by. Fine, listeners, and we will edit this for the podcast. Of course.
Even major broadcasts I'm seeing. It's like production issues everywhere. Uh-oh. I think you're there, maybe.
Yeah, for a second. This is an issue I have. Hold on. I guess we'll just try, see if we can get finished. I have a feeling it's going to go down again.
Okay, fingers crossed. Oh, there's two of you.
Yeah, there's two of me.
Double Steve.
1 sec. I'm backstage. All right, there we go. So I'm going to hide that. But it might be that it drops out, in which case I'll come back. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to switch over to this one.
Okay.
There we go. So now we can assume we're going to keep going.
Your picture is actually so much clearer on your phone.
Yeah, all right. That's not good. We'll solve that another day. So let's just pick up where we dropped off.
So you were saying, I was asking you the question, which is, when it comes to Jack Dorsey, do you believe that he is not in a position where he can actually make decisions because he's influenced by others? Or do you think he is consciously just saying, you know what, hands off, like, I'm just going to let the people around me do their thing, and he's just sort of being passive and complacent?
You know, there are people that know him better than I do. Here's my gut as an outsider. I think it's not about money. He's wealthy. I think it's similar, frankly, to Ohanian at Reddit. I think you get to a place where you think you're really making a different kind of community. You're really making the world a better place. And it's not like, I mean, is Square fun to run?
Who knows?
It's a banking app. It's got to be boring as dirt. You know, he's not a fun, you know, so I think the answer to the question is, like, either you're the CEO of Twitter and you have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, or you're not, and you're the ex-CEO of Twitter. And when you show up at the restaurant, assuming we all ever get to go to restaurants again, and you say, I want the nice table by the window, they say, oh, you're the ex-CEO of Twitter. Not nearly as cool.
Do you think it's like an ego and an attachment thing? There's like a letting go that is probably necessary, but is not happening fast enough.
So let's say, for argument's sake, he's not the CEO of Twitter any longer. Who would be better? Let's play that game.
I'm sure there are some executives who turned over the years who could potentially be more effective.
So the argument being made is that as long as Facebook and Twitter don't charge anything, and this is the Scott Galloway argument, and he's made it rather publicly, as long as Facebook and Twitter are advertising businesses and their health and well-being economically is based on garnering the most number of eyeballs, they're going to always be bad for the democracy.
It's hard to actually argue against that.
So Roger McNamee gives this very compelling argument in which he says that you have to remember that Zuckerberg works around the world and essentially has to be aligned with the existing governments in every place where he's participates. So like Trump is one of a long list of leaders that he needs to play nice with. Right. So let's get to the news of the week. Well, there's a lot of news of the week, but then Twitter comes out on Thursday morning after the shareholder meeting on Wednesday and starts putting warning labels on Trump's tweets.
Yep.
Trump goes ballistic, and immediately says, I'm gonna write an executive order that's going to make these platforms not be allowed to do that any longer.
Yeah.
A couple things happen. That's essentially Trump saying, I'm going to disassemble Section 230. Which would have huge shareholder value issues for both Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and all kinds of other people, YouTube as well. Two things happen. Dorsey essentially doubles down and puts his latest tweet behind a warning label, Trump's latest tweet. And Zuckerberg gets on the phone with Trump on Friday night and goes on Fox News and says, we're not going to determine what's true or untrue coming from the president.
Yep.
Which
walks back a statement he made previously where he said, if we see content that's not true, incites violence, promotes incorrect information, that we'll look at it.
Yes. So that's really bad.
It's scary times, Steve. It's hard to know it's hard to know who to trust. It's hard to know where to engage. It's hard to know what to consume. It's hard to know what how leaders can operate.
So I'm going to make some predictions.
Okay.
I think Dorsey is going to continue to instruct his teams to ramp up the editing of Donald Trump.
Okay.
And I think he's going to be,
agree.
and I think he's going to be fired as the CEO.
Interesting. Okay.
Because if you go back to where we began the show and you talk about activist investors, all they care about is making money. So, as much as you can say Trump had no authority to make this executive order, the idea that the FCC is going to be responsible for platforms, I mean, it's batshit crazy, right? Because once you go down that road, you could just as easily say, and by the way, Trump's also going to tell the New York Times to stop, putting Kara Swisher in the paper, and Trump's going to tell the Wall Street Journal they ought to, publish a weekly column from Melania, and there's no distinction between Twitter and the New York Times or the Washington Post. from a legal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you understand? I mean, television has always had obligations to the Federal Communications Commission because the public airwaves are licenses you get from the federal government.
Yep.
Cable television is a wire that's privately owned that comes into your house from a company that you pay a license fee to. There's no public responsibility there. So once the president claims that he's got the authority and the ability to regulate what publishers publish or don't publish, I mean, he might as well have an edict saying he wants to be able to write a weekly column in the New York Times, and I've issued. I mean, it's no different.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're, Elliott Capital Management, really, you've got to play a very careful game here, because, if civil unrest overwhelms a whole bunch of your companies, like the meltdown isn't just about Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean,
how much would you say this is similar to, I don't know, like the end of or the decline of AOL, or when, I don't know, just like older .com media properties?
I don't think
is this signaling the end of Twitter and Facebook, meaning that we actually are going to have government regulation, but it's not going to be in the style that, say, Elizabeth Warren was promoting. Instead, it's going to be an executive order issued from the president, and now all of a sudden it's a new chapter. These platforms, whether they continue to prevail or whether they decline, this is basically marking sort of a crossroads.
So two things. Going back to the Section 230 panel that we did at South by Southwest virtually, with the former commissioner, now former chairwoman, now commissioner of the FEC, and Yael Eisenstadt, and David from the UN. Net, what Trump's just done is open himself up a whole can of whoop ass. Because if in fact the platforms don't have immunity from liability claims, then what happens is everyone sues the hell out of them for everything they're publishing about Trump, positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one thing everyone seems to agree with is that Section 230 needs to be rewritten. Interestingly enough, lost in this is the fact that Joe Biden has said that Section 230 needs to be repealed. So it may be the only thing he and Trump actually agree on, but for entirely different reasons.
Right.
Trump, because he's got some argument that somehow the platforms are biased against conservative voices, and Biden because he thinks they're run amok and dangerous. I'm putting words in his mouth, but some version thereof.
Yeah.
All right. So two other quick headlines. Microsoft Facebook we kind of covered. I don't know about you, but I've had you've been off Facebook for a while, but a whole bunch of people have tweeted or posted that they're now shutting down their Facebook account because they think Zuckerberg's gone too far.
Yeah, this is like every 6 to 8 months. I feel like there's a wave of something that makes people say, I'm going to delete my Facebook account.
Yeah, maybe. And now let's talk about Microsoft for a minute. So Microsoft is firing and shutting down their news operation.
Yeah, I mean, it's so many institutions right now are just being dismantled, challenged, innovated, disrupted. I don't know what we want to call it, but like media and local news, I feel like has been under threat and has been on the verge of, I don't know, approaching extinction for a while. Like we've talked about this so many times. And I feel like this is just one of many headlines in this overarching story that we don't value journalism. We don't value journalistic integrity. We're not willing to find sustainable models to actually support local journalism. And this Microsoft headline for me is sort of just saying, like, yeah, like these are jobs that can be replaced. They can be automated.
So a couple things worth remembering: the acronym MSNBC and what it stands for.
Remind me.
MS stands for Microsoft.
Oh, yep.
So MSNBC was a joint venture between NBC and Microsoft a million, gazillion, quadrillion years ago. And they spun out. Yeah, well, yeah, you were like 12. But they've been in the news business on or off for a long time. I was puzzled, like when they say they're out of news, whatever their news acronym is, wasn't that the thing that they just launched at LinkedIn like a month ago?
I don't know. I don't know if this is like a semantics thing, right? Because like, are they then saying that LinkedIn is media and that, you know, information, content, the distribution of it is shifting? And so instead of funding platforms, they're like older platforms, they're investing more in channels like LinkedIn. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not good. It's a lot of journalists out of work.
At a time when we need them most.
Yeah, desperately so. So we did a hour-long live to tape podcast with Craig Newmark and from Craigslist, and Vivian Schiller, who's now at the Aspen Institute, and Jay Rosen from NYU. And we spent about 15 minutes talking about the whole strategy of how they're managing news out of the White House. And it's actually a Steve Bannon strategy.
Interesting. Okay.
And the Steve Bannon strategy is flood the zone with shit. Make it so overwhelming that voters will say, I can't tell who's right or who's wrong, so I'm giving up on all of them.
Yep.
We are smack in the middle of that today.
I mean, it's that strategy has been so effective, right? Would you not agree? I feel like when I see news coverage that is so reactive to every single tweet, I feel like it perpetuates this cycle of making all of these things that are misinformed. It amplifies it. Like we lose the plot so much in terms of what is happening because we get distracted by all of the stupid shit.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's right. And, you know, it was interesting. I was listening to NPR this morning and they were tap dancing around. There are agitators causing these riots, but they couldn't really put their finger on whether the agitators were the Boogie Boys or the Antifa. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem to me like a question you should know the answer to.
Right.
Like, because anyway, so, but I am interested in knowing the answer for those of us who are listening. If you know the answer to who's the agitators, just, you can message us, you can text us, you can comment.
To be honest, one of the things we talked about online education a lot, I wish every school of journalism would just publish its curriculum, because in this age of citizen journalism, it would help if I think more media makers on the ground actually just understood, okay, what is it? How can I actually gather evidence? How can I cite sources? How can I find a source? How do I actually make media and citizen journalism sort of meet a standard that has the same integrity that trained journalists would have? Like it's a concept or an idea that I've been marinating on for so long with like the Citizen app, with sort of all of these videos that I've been seeing from protests. Like I find myself hungry for trained journalism, but at the same time, I also know that these local newsrooms are not equipped and not as agile to kind of capture the stories in the way that people are on their smartphones.
Did you by any chance watch the live footage of the CNN crew being arrested in Minneapolis?
Yep.
I kept waiting for it to break and for the cops that looked like they were dressed like RoboCop to stop. Like when they finally figured out that they were arresting a live CNN crew on live television, they would take the zip ties off the guy's arm and say, "We're sorry." And
No.
unclear to me what the thinking was on the side of the cops that was a good idea.
I don't think there's a lot of thinking being done. Too many people are in heightened states of emotion, and it's really like fight or flight. When you are provoked in that way, it's hard to make smart, logical decisions. You're just acting out of fear.
All right. Well, we are out of time. And, I will remind everyone that if you haven't had a chance to poke around and learn about Elliott Capital Management, I think they're the critical linchpin in what happens to the Twitter platform in the next 5 months. And, if you have spare time and you feel like dropping a note to one of the 10 Twitter board members, I think that probably would be a good thing too, just to let them know that people are paying attention, not just to, I think Jack Dorsey is the face of the organization, but I think there are a lot of people with influence whose names are easily discoverable. And with that, we will be back again next week. And now that I know that my phone makes a much better video picture than my desktop computer, I don't know how that will change my workflow, but it certainly will, which is weird, right?
Yeah.
All
I
right.
hope everyone stays safe. Everyone takes care of themselves and their loved ones, and also takes time to educate themselves on how to dismantle systemic racism. It's a complex issue. It's something that I think people are scared to talk about. We're not talking about it now on this show, but I encourage everyone to read up. There's so many resources out there.
Totally agree. See you next week.